In Ukraine, Russia has launched its second largest aerial assault of the war, striking the center of the capital, Kyiv. Many people are dead and injured. There has been widespread condemnation of the attack. European Union offices were damaged as a result of the assault. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says she has spoken with the leaders of both Ukraine and the U.S. The Ukrainian Air Force says Russia fired 629 missiles and drones. The latest figures now have at least 19 people dead. Dozens more are wounded. It is still a rescue and recovery operation as many people are trapped in the rubble of damaged buildings. More than 20 sites were hit overall. Ukraine's president posted on social media after the attacks. Volodymyr Zelensky wrote, Russia chooses ballistics instead of the negotiating table. It chooses to continue killing instead of ending the war. We're taking you now to Ottawa to listen to the Commissioner of the Future of Sport in Canada releasing her preliminary recommendations to improve the sport system in the country. Let's listen in.
Lise Maisonneuve, commissaire de la Commission sur l'avenir du sport au Canada, ainsi que les deux conseillers spéciaux de la Commission, Noni Klassen and Andrew Pipe. The Commissioner will share her remarks and go over some key highlights in the Commission's preliminary report. Following her remarks, we will go into a 10-minute question period. If some questions cannot be answered today due to the time constraint, please follow up with the Commission's media relations team by email. The
Commissioner will make some opening remarks and after bringing forward the highlights of the report. After her remarks, we will move to a 10-minute question and answer period. If your questions cannot be answered today because of time constraints, please follow up with the media relations team at the Commission. Commissioner, you have the floor. Before I begin, I'd like to point out that we are meeting today on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I recognize and appreciate the lands on which we work and live, as well as the people who have cared for it.
Before giving my remarks, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. I acknowledge and give thanks to the land on which we live and we work, and to the people who cared for it. Le Canada est une nation sportive.
Is a sporting nation. Every day, many Canadians organize sporting activities and anticipate or act as trainers. This physical activity is part and parcel of their life.
Are an essential component of Canadian culture, pride, and identity. From community playgrounds to championship podiums, Canadians actively participate and celebrate sport from the grassroots to the world stage, bringing us together as a society. Although sport has multiple benefits, including for the health and well-being of Canadians, these have escaped many. The Future of Sport in Canada Commission was established in May of 2024, following several major reports, including 2 parliamentary committee reports regarding, amongst other things, allegations of maltreatment and abuse in Canadian sport. While others may have examined, in part, some of the issues plaguing the sports system, the Commission constitutes an independent, comprehensive review of the Canadian sports system as a whole. The Government of Canada gave us a mandate that is twofold. We were asked to review the Canadian sports system and make recommendations to the Government of Canada to improve, 1, safe sport, and 2, the sports system in a trauma-informed environment. Early on in our work, it became clear to us that the 2 parts of our mandate are closely interconnected. A robust, well-governed, and well-supported sports system is essential to the creation of safe and inclusive sport environments. We have also come to understand that this twofold mandate is extremely broad, given the complexity of the sports system in this country. Indeed, in the last year, we met approximately 825 people. Some of these meetings took place during the Commission's cross-country discussions and roundtables, which were held in 13 cities across 9 provinces and territories. We spoke with representatives from all 13 provincial and territorial governments, as well as representatives from the federal government. We also met, amongst others, with victims and survivors, athletes, coaches, parents, administrators, experts, academic, and representatives from a wide variety of organizations across all levels of the sport system. These include national, provincial, and territorial sport organizations, along with multi-sport services organizations. We received over 1,000 written submissions and documents from participants and members of the Canadian public. The first finding that emerges from this engagement process is that the Canadian sports system is in crisis. As many have told us, it is broken. Le premier constat qui se dégage de notre
The
travail
first finding of our work is that the Canadian sports system is in crisis. As a number of people pointed out to us, it is now broken. The challenge that we heard about from Canadians is multifaceted. A lack of protection for our children, abuse and maltreatment, which is widespread in the sports environment in Canada at all levels, from local to national. A culture of silence that often deters people from expressing themselves out of fear of reprisals. A lack of leadership and strategic vision at the national level, a proliferation of sport organizations, and a misalignment at every level of sport. Largely inadequate funding focused on high-performance sport, deficient governance practices, and a lack of transparency within sports organizations, a lack of access and opportunity for many athletes, but particularly for para-athletes, Black athletes, people of color, or those coming from the LGBTQ+ community. Prevention strategies which are not consistent to foster sport environments that are safe and to prevent maltreatment, and non-consistent complaint mechanisms when it comes to dealing with such complaints.
The challenges that we heard from Canadians are as profound as they are numerous. They are as follows: lack of protection for our children, widespread abuse and maltreatment within sport environments across the country at all levels, from grassroots participation to the national stage. A culture of silence that often discourages individuals from speaking out for fear of retribution. A lack of leadership and strategic vision nationwide. A multitude of sport organizations and misalignment across the system. Scarce funding, disproportionately supporting high-performance sports, inconsistent governance practices across the sports system, and a lack of transparency within sport organizations. Lack of access and opportunity for many, but more particularly for para-athletes, Black and Indigenous and people of color, and those of the 2S/LGBTQI+ communities. Inconsistent prevention strategies, such as public registries to foster safe sport environment and prevent maltreatment, and numerous and often inconsistent complaints mechanism to administer complaints and safe sport policies. These deeply ingrained issues give rise to conflicts of interest, favoritism, a win-at-all-costs thinking, and a pervasive fear of losing funding across the system. Together, they fuel a long-standing culture of silence in sport, a culture that has persisted largely due to the historical normalization of harmful practices, entrenched cultural norms, power dynamics, and the lack of diversity of some sporting environments. Ensemble, ils alimentent une culture de
Together,
silence.
they represent a culture of silence that is deeply rooted in the sports environment and continues to exist because of the historic normalization of harmful practices, certain cultural practices, power dynamics, and a lack of diversity in certain sports environments.
The convergence of these factors create conditions conducive to maltreatment in sport to persist and remain unchecked, even as recent societal movements have encouraged countless individuals worldwide to break their silence on systemic sexual harassment and abuse across workplaces, industries, and other spheres of society. As we have repeatedly heard throughout our work, maltreatment in sport, including physical punishment, sexual assault, training while injured, humiliation, intimidation, isolation tactics, failures to provide medical care, discrimination, and exploitation continue to permeate at all levels. It is also prevalent at the grassroots and local levels, where most children and young people participate. Furthermore, victims and survivors are often lost in the web of various complaints mechanisms, resulting in many feeling helpless and abandoned. While we acknowledge the efforts of the Government of Canada, including Sport Canada and others, have made in recent years to create safer sport environments, the change required to tackle systemic maltreatment in the Canadian sport system must be transformative and profound. Canadians are demanding a fundamental shift in the culture of sport. But such a shift will not occur through reforms at the top of the sports system only. While the Government of Canada must play a leadership role in driving change, provincial and territorial governments, along with sport governing bodies, must actively collaborate to ensure that it transcends provincial and community levels altogether. Shared jurisdiction over sport does not preclude transformative change. Rather, it means that meaningful collaboration between all levels of government is essential. Our preliminary recommendations seek to, 1, implement an integrated sports system spanning from the national to the grassroots levels, and 2, establish a harmonized safe sport approach. Allow me now to present the main recommendations. In relation to the sports system, we recommend that the functions of sport and physical activity be integrated under the same organization. We also recommend the creation of a centralized sport entity, an entity independent from the federal government, tasked with providing strategic leadership, coordination, administration, and oversight of sport and physical activity across the Canadian sports system. Par ailleurs,
Furthermore, in order to guarantee that the sports system has the necessary resources to respond to the needs of all participants and foster more inclusive sports environments, we are recommending the development of a new funding model for sport. In addition to urgently increasing funding for national sport organizations and parasport organizations, we are also recommending the development of a funding strategy which is based on the long term.
Has the necessary resources to meet the needs of all participants and to promote more inclusive and accessible sport environments. We recommend the development of a new sport funding model. At the level of sport organization, we recommend that federal funding be made conditional on compliance with enhanced governance requirements, going beyond those set out in the Canadian Sport Governance Code. With the aim of increasing the overall efficiency of the sports system and optimizing the use of resources and public funds, we recommend implementing measures to strengthen the coordination, alignments, and collaboration between sport organizations at all levels and between different sports.
With respect to safe sport, our preliminary report deals with three major priorities: prevention, intervention and support. After more than a year of engagement, we have seen that it is necessary to focus more on the prevention of maltreatment and the need for interventions after harm has been caused.
Our report is structured around three key priorities: prevention, response, and support. Over more than a year of engagement, we found that greater emphasis must be placed on preventing maltreatment, in addition to responding after harm has occurred. As a result, we recommend the development of a national safe sport education program for delivery to all individuals involved in sport organizations that receive federal funding. We also recommend that the Government of Canada either mandate background screening requirements or develop, in collaboration with relevant participants, a standardized background screening policy for adoption by sport organizations receiving federal funding. For both measures, we explore ways to expand the requirements to provincial, territorial, and community-level sport organizations. To further reinforce prevention efforts, we recommend establishing a nationwide public registry of individuals whose ability to participate in sport has been restricted. With respect to response to maltreatment, we set out in the preliminary report options which will allow for an integrated approach to responding to maltreatment across all levels of the Canadian sports system. Amongst the various options, we propose that the Government of Canada collaborate with its provincial and territorial counterparts to establish a national safe sport authority or tribunal responsible for enforcing federal, provincial, and territorial safe sport legislations to be enacted by their respective legislators. The National Safe Sport Authority or Tribunal could leverage the expertise and experience gained by the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport. Finally, we identified essential features that any complaint mechanism addressing reports of maltreatment should include to better support all those involved. Importantly, we recommend that they be accessible, transparent, independent, and timely, while incorporating trauma-informed approaches and upholding procedural fairness. As reflected in our preliminary recommendations, we moved beyond the status quo and the constraints posed by the division of powers within our federal system to identify sustainable solutions to systemic issues undermining the Canadian sports system. Nous sommes conscients
We are aware that the success of this solution depends in large part on close collaboration between the different levels of government and sport organizations. And government, as well as Canadians, have clearly said they want to see significant reforms that will help all those who participate in sport across this country.
Governments, as well as Canadians, have expressed a genuine willingness to come together to carry out a reform that will benefit all participants in sport across our country. Although the release of the preliminary report marks an important milestone in the Commission's work, our mandate is far from complete. As the title of the report says, these are very much preliminary recommendations. Indeed, in a few weeks, the National Summit on the Future of Sport will take place in the nation's capital. This event will provide invited participants with the opportunity to deliberate, either in person or virtually, or on our preliminary findings and recommendations. Furthermore, an online feedback form has been made available to allow everyone to share their perspectives with us. All of this feedback, both from the summit and the online form, will be considered before the Commission submits its final recommendations to the Government of Canada. To conclude, the Canadian sports system is currently at a crossroads. This situation is largely due to the courage of victims, survivors, and witnesses who dared to speak out against abuse, harassment, and discrimination in sport, thereby prompting governments to act. We are all indebted to them, as their courage will contribute to building a revitalized, inclusive, and safe sports system for future generations. En conclusion, le
To
système
conclude,
sportif canadien
the
se
Canadian
trouve
sports system
à la croisée
is
des chemins.
currently at a
Cette
crossroads.
situation est en grande
This
partie
situation is in
attribuable
large
au
part
courage des personnes
thanks to the
victimes et
courage of
survivantes
victims and
et des
survivors
témoins qui ont
and
osé
witnesses who
dénoncer
dared
les
to
abus,
speak out
le
about
harcèlement
abuse,
et la
harassment,
discrimination dans le sport,
and discrimination in
incitant
sport,
ainsi les gouvernements à
prompting
agir.
governments to take action.
Nous leur sommes tous
We
redevables,
are all
car
very
leur
grateful to
courage
them
contribuera
because
à
their
bâtir un
courage will
système
help us to
sportif
build a sports system in
revitalisé,
Canada that is
inclusif et
revitalized
sécuritaire pour les
and
générations
safe
à venir.
for generations to
Nous
come.
devons saisir cette occasion.
We must seize this
Nous avons
opportunity.
entendu des gens qui
We
souhaitent
heard
un
from
meilleur
people
système
who would like
et
there to be a
souhaitent
better
collaborer.
system and who wish to
Il est clair
collaborate.
pour nous
It is clear
que
to
les
us
Canadiennes et les
that
Canadiens
Canadians
se
across the
soucient
country
du
are
système du
concerned
sport
about
et de
the
l'activité
sport
physique
system
et
and physical
souhaitent un
activity
système
and would
sportif
like to see a sport
sécuritaire
system that
et
is
dynamique.
safe and dynamic.
Le Canada peut être un
Canada
chef de file.
can be a leader in this
Il est
way.
temps pour le Canada
It is
de
now
briller
time for
sur
Canada
le podium,
to show
mais aussi
that
partout au
it
pays.
can be at
Dans
the
les
podium,
arénas de hockey,
but also
les
a
terrains de
leader
soccer,
in soccer
les clubs de
fields,
gymnastique
in
et
gym
les terrains de
clubs,
pickleball,
and
seulement
in
pour en
pickleball
nommer
fields,
quelques-uns.
just to give those
Bâtissons
examples.
sur l'élan en
Let
cours.
us build on this
We must
momentum now.
seize this opportunity that we have. We heard that people want to have a better system and are interested to work together. It is clear to us that Canadians care about sport and physical activity, and they want a safe and vibrant sports system. Canada can be a leader. It's time for Canada to shine on the podium, but also across this nation in hockey arenas, soccer fields, gymnastic clubs, pickleball courts, just to name a few. Let's build on the current momentum. Merci. Thank you, Miigwech.
Merci, Madame la Commissaire. We will now begin the question period. As we only have 10 minutes, please, we ask that you limit yourself to one question and one follow-up. For the reporters in the room, we have 2 mic stands on either side of the room. For those of you that are joining us online, we ask that you please use the raise hand function on Zoom and turn on your camera when asking your question. Before asking your question, please state your name and media outlet. We will start with the journalist standing by the microphone on your left, and then we will alternate. Donc, nous allons maintenant commencer la période des questions. Étant donné que nous avons seulement 10 minutes, merci de vous limiter à une question et une question de suivi. Pour les journalistes qui sont présents dans la salle, il y a 2 micros aux 2 côtés de la salle. Et pour ceux qui sont avec nous en ligne, merci d'utiliser la fonction de main levée sur Zoom et de bien allumer votre caméra lorsque vous posez votre question. Avant de poser votre question, n'oubliez pas de mentionner votre nom et votre média. Nous allons commencer avec les journalistes en présentiel, au micro qui se trouve près de votre gauche, et ensuite nous alternerons. Merci.
Bonjour, Julien Paquette avec le Journal Le Droit. Écoute,
Journal Le Droit.
Il y a plusieurs problèmes que vous soulignez
There are
dans ce
a number
rapport
of problems you mention in your preliminary report
Il y a des enjeux,
that involve
des contraintes qui rendent ça difficile, par
constraints,
exemple les vérifications d'antécédents, des fois, il y a
such
des
as background
backlogs
checks
interminables avant de
and
pouvoir
interminal
avoir
backlogs
les résultats de ces
before
enquêtes-là.
being able to get the results of those
Quelles parmi vos
inquiries.
recommandations vous
So
voyez
among
sont
your
des trucs qui peuvent
recommendations,
être,
which ones
à la fois appliquer rapidement
could
puis avoir un
be
grand impact sur
implemented quickly in order to have a major impact on safety in sport,
la sécurité des athlètes à tous
the
les
safety of athletes at every level?
Il faut pas oublier
Thank you.
que
I
nos
think it's important to
recommandations sont des
remember that our recommendations
recommandations
are
préliminaires,
preliminary
et le rapport final
recommendations,
sera livré,
and the final
en
report will
2026.
be delivered in
En
2026.
fait, quelles sont les plus importantes?
In terms of the most
Nous
important
croyons que
ones,
chacune
we
des
believe that
recommandations
each
est
of our
importante en
recommendations
soi.
are
Il y en a
important
peut-être
on
qui
their
sont plus
own.
faciles
Some may be
à faire un
easier
peu
to
plus vite,
implement
entre autres, peut-être un
more
programme
quickly.
d'éducation,
For example,
ça
an
marcherait
education
mieux.
program, that would be one
Et
example.
de
And
pouvoir
the ability to collaborate between provinces. Because as I said in my opening remarks, there is a huge appetite out there and a huge interest in at all levels of government and among sports organizations to participate and to find a solution. So that's my answer.
Et puis, ma seconde question, vous parlez aussi du
And you
financement
also talk about funding,
qui doit être augmenté de façon urgente.
which needs to be increased.
Une idée
Do you have an idea of what level you're talking, what level of funding you're talking about, what order of magnitude is needed? No, we did not specify any amounts. However, it is clear that federal funding has not been increased since 2005, and this is creating very serious problems for sport organizations in terms of surviving in the current environment. It's also important to note that with very good reasons, we're asking sport organizations, both national and provincial and territorial, to do a lot more with the same amount of money. And that's why we're saying that this is an urgent problem, that there be additional funding provided to these organizations.
Do we have other questions in the room? D'autres questions en présentiel? We will now take questions from journalists on Zoom. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions des journalistes sur Zoom et nous allons aller dans l'ordre où les mains ont été levées. So we will go in the order in which the raised hands were raised online. Donc, on va commencer avec Mathieu Massé de Radio-Canada.
Oui, bonjour. Donc voilà, Mathieu Massé de Radio-Canada.
Radio
J'ai pas de
Canada.
caméra à mon poste
I don't have a camera at my workstation, unfortunately, but the report talks about the urgency of increasing basic funding for organizations. But it also says there's a lack of follow-up and a lack of oversight. So given those issues, what kind of guarantee would there be that even if funding is increased on an urgent basis, as you state in the report, that this would be vigorously monitored? Well, that's a good question. Obviously, both have to go together. It's important that everyone, and there is, as I say, an appetite in in terms of looking at current practices and governance and the funding they receive. And the Canadian government, as we're recommending, must also ensure it does the proper oversight and make people accountable for all the public money that they receive.
Je vous relancerai là-dessus. L'idée de créer
Now,
des
the idea
organismes
of creating
ça se fait pas en claquant des doigts.
accountable organizations and exactly what will this change? You're asking for funding to be provided urgently. That's somewhat paradoxical. If it's urgent and we haven't got new structures, new governance structures in place, this will not ensure that there is proper accountability and oversight. Well, the governance structures that need to be implemented can be implemented fairly quickly. We can change that governance system without the independent entity that we mentioned be created. Now, if the government decides to follow that recommendation, it will obviously take some time, and that's normal. However, there are a number of other measures we mentioned in the report that could be implemented. One, to increase or enhance governance, and second, to ensure that there is a proper accountability of the use of these funds, and that could be done at the same time that the funding is authorized. And it could also be a condition for receiving federal funding. Thank you, Commissioner.
We will now go with Rick Westhead from TSN.
Hi, good afternoon. I just had a chance to read through preliminarily the report anyway, and a lot of the recommendations that you're making are almost exactly the same as those that were made in June 2024 by the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. As far as I can tell, the 21 recommendations that report suggested, including a national sanctions registry that was available to everyone, more transparency about publishing board meeting records and finances, none of those have actually been adopted. And so my question is, more than a year's passed, where do you find any optimism that the recommendations that your commission is making, will be followed up on when the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage's recommendations, there's been no action on any of those?
The point that came out loud and clear for us was that our commission was one of the first time that people were having the conversation that they felt was so important to have. And that is with the victims and survivors, with the different sport organizations, with the athletes, with all levels of government. And it was done in a trauma-informed way. As a result, we felt and we have seen that there is a great appetite to come together and to finally have the discussion that needs to be had to put in place the changes that we have recommended. And I can assure you that Canadians do care about sport a great deal. Even those who went through a great deal of trauma still care about the importance of sport and want to contribute to make a different sports system in Canada and to have a healthy, vibrant sports system.
You also, in your report, identify some challenges with jurisdiction, with national sport organizations being able to ensure that codes of conduct are followed by provincial organizations kind of under their purview. And one of the things I've heard from people who lead both national and provincial and territorial sport organizations is one way to address this would be to ensure that any provincial or territorial sport organization that did not adopt the codes that the national organization puts in place, that those PTSOs would no longer be eligible to have athletes considered for national team programs. And I was told if this was introduced, that literally in days that the PTSOs would get on board. I didn't see anything about that in your report, and I'm wondering if any of the people who've testified have raised that as a possible leverage option for NSOs.
Our report does discuss that. Our report talks about it with vertical and horizontal alignment, both at the governance level, but also with the complaints mechanism. We have made suggestions on how the federal government can work with the national sport organizations and the provincial and territorial sport organizations to get them to do exactly that, to get them to adopt the UCCMS and for them to be bound by the same rules of the UCCMS, and we even go further by suggesting different entities that could actually we can have a uniform, centralized system in Canada to deal with complaints mechanism so that it is transparent, open, and that people understand where to go.
Thank you.
We have time for one last question, so we will go with Gemma Carton-Smith from the Canadian Press.
Hi there. Building on Rick's question a little bit, I was interested in this national entity that you proposed to kind of oversee administration of safe sport. What kind of teeth do you see this organization having in order to do that work?
You'll note that in the report that we offer different suggestions of what this central entity could be and exactly where it would stay. We based a lot of our findings also on other international countries who have a similar entity. And of course, these are preliminary recommendations, and we are looking forward to hearing from others as to what exactly should this entity do, where should it lie, and how can it actually have teeth the way that you are asking.
Additionally, you talked in the report about the need for a better funding structure. Can you expand a little bit on that? Is it the fact that the money isn't going to the right places or that there isn't enough money to go around?
We have heard both. Canadians have expressed both, that often the money comes in piecemeal. Often the funds are given under different programs and projects, and it needs to be streamlined a bit better. So we have heard both, that there's a lack of funds and that the process to obtain the funds should be better than it is.
Merci. C'est ce qui met fin à cette conférence de presse. Pour toute autre question, nous vous invitons à faire le suivi avec l'équipe des relations médias de la Commission.
You've been listening to Lise Maisonneuve, the Commissioner of the Future of Sport in Canada Commission, offering her preliminary report into sport abuse in this country and 71 recommendations aimed at enhancing safe sport. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But she said that the Canadian sports system is in crisis and now broken, that there is a lack of protection for children and abuse and maltreatment at all levels right across the country. The CBC's Hilary Johnstone has been following along and joins me now. And so, Hilary, quite a damning report from the Commissioner.
Quite a damning report, very, very strong language that she used. And I think it's probably helpful here if we talk a little bit about what her mandate was and then what it was we just heard from her. So Commissioner Lise Maisonneuve had a very broad mandate. This was not just looking at sports in Canada at the federally funded level. This was about looking at sports and the sporting organizations in this country on a whole. So she was looking at how to improve the sports system right across the country, also at the provincial, the territorial, and the club level as well. What are we talking about here when she talks about abuse and maltreatment? Well, that is also wide-ranging. So she looked at a number of things, including physical punishment, bullying, body shaming, sexual exploitation, abuse of power imbalances, failure to meet basic needs, racism, sexism, and homophobia. And she identified a number of things that she thinks is leading to some of these allegations that we have heard in recent years. And you heard her say there that she went to some 13 cities across 9 provinces and territories, that a lot of the information she has gathered were first-hand accounts from athletes, from young people as well, about what they have experienced as they have gone through Canada's sports system over the years. So a lot of this came to light after the 2022 Olympic Games in Beijing. In some cases, people have been submitting complaints and information online, in some cases speaking with the Commissioner here and her team. A number of things, including what she described as a leadership vacuum. Also talked about a funding crisis. So much of the funding for sports in this country has not gone up since 2005. So that is 20 years ago now. Talked about fragmented structure, that there isn't some sort of centralized organization in this country that oversees sports and makes sure that everyone is complying with the various rules that they'd like to see in place. She also talked about this focus on high performance. So seeing athletes as commodities rather than thinking about them as people, in some cases even children as well. So she talked about that. In terms of what she would like to see, she said that there needs to be more of a focus on prevention rather than just reacting once there is a complaint. She'd like to see standardized background checks. She also talked about the need for a national registry so that if there are individuals who are identified as maybe being a bad actor, someone who should not be part of sports in this country, that is more centralized and at a national level so that people can find those names, for example. So along with addressing the funding problems, she also talked about mandating governance structures and making sure that funding is dependent on following rules that are set out, following those standards, along with that what we were just talking about, the public registry and need for more funding as well. So a broad mandate. Whether or not any of this is adopted, of course, Andrew, is still something that remains to be seen. That's an open question. And this is, of course, just a preliminary report at this point. Her full report is expected at some point next year.
Hilary, thank you. The CBC's Hilary Johnstone. Amelia Klein was listening to that briefing. She has also started going through the Commission's report. Amelia is a lawyer and a former elite gymnast. She is also the managing director of Athletes Empowered. It's an organization dedicated to fostering a safe and supportive environment for athletes. Amelia, appreciate you taking the time. I know you're probably eager to go through almost the 400 pages, but before you get to do that, just tell me, how were you reacting as you were listening to the Commissioner?
Well, it was quite emotional. It's the culmination of years, if not decades, of work by brave survivors who have just relentlessly continued to come forward, even in the face of so much resistance from the sports system to change. To hear that summary of how broken our system is. It hits all the points that we have been discussing and trying to get government to take action on. So it it was quite powerful to hear that.
What did you make of the recommendations?
I think they're an excellent start. They do incorporate a lot of the things that advocates and survivors have been recommending throughout all of these processes. We have a fractured system, and that has contributed in large part to the crisis that we see of abuse in sport. And so the recommendations for centralizing this system is quite key. The recognition that abuse and maltreatment is happening at all levels of sport, that we need to stop emphasizing elite sport, and we need to start focusing our resources down to the grassroots. Those things are so critical and actually are potential mechanisms to see meaningful change.
Can you tell us a little bit about the abuse you suffered and its impact on you?
Yeah, of course. I was an elite gymnast from the time I was about 2 years old until I was about 14. And for the last few years of my gymnastics career, I had a pair of abusive coaches who subjected us to all forms of emotional and physical abuse, weighing, fat shaming, name calling, yelling, as well as just very unsafe training environments where myself and my teammates suffered significant injuries, often directly at the hands of our coaches. And unfortunately, we know that experience, even though my experience was 20 years ago, those experiences continue to be perpetuated throughout gyms and skating rinks and other sport environments right throughout this country. So again, it was validating to hear that the recognition that this is a widespread problem. This is not just a few bad apples. This isn't just a few unlucky athletes who experience these things. This is ubiquitous, and it's something that deserves urgent attention.
Are you optimistic that some of these recommendations will actually be implemented?
That's going to be the key question. Having this report is significant. Having the public awareness around these issues does help to provide the pressure that government is going to need to actually implement these recommendations. And it's really going to take government being motivated to implement these things to see these recommendations implemented. So I think that's going to be the key question, and it's going to take everyone in this country continuing to place the pressure where it needs to go.
Is there one or a couple of recommendations or areas where you think the government should really focus on first?
I think the idea of a centralized complaints mechanism and tribunal is really, really key. What we're seeing is that people who suffer from abuse or maltreatment in sport are met with this hodgepodge, fractured system of complaint mechanisms right now. And it makes it almost impossible for them to navigate. And we're not seeing sanctions and disciplinary action taken in the way that they should be, in large part because of that fractured system. So if I could implore government to focus their attention, it would be on creating that mechanism on an urgent basis so that we can actually start seeing accountability and consequences for perpetrators of abuse in this system.
You speak to athletes as a former elite athlete yourself and as an advocate. Do those who have reached the pinnacle have concerns about what it took to get there? Do many of them say it just wasn't worth it?
Yes, sadly, even with so much of our resources devoted to elite sport, Olympic sport results, if you speak to many of the people who reach that level, which is already such a rarity, many will say the experience that it took to get there left them broken. And many will also say that once they retire, they feel like they were discarded by the system because they no longer had value. Again, speaking to the point that we heard from the commissioner today of athletes feeling like they're commodities, which is really how we characterize them currently in our current system. So I think it's important that abuse is happening at every level, and even those who achieve the incredible success that we hope for all of our athletes, they're leaving this system damaged, broken, and in need of support. And so we really need to take a very hard look at our entire system and say, really, winning at all costs is not worth it. We need to change how we deliver sport in this country.
Maybe this is a first step to fixing that broken system. We'll see. Amelia, appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.